Welcome back. All right, enough. So, LA Kings. I want to talk about the Kings, and I've been discussing this in videos, so I want to get into what I mean with the LA Kings. They're very all over the place when it comes to their results, but one thing is they are currently second in the Pacific. They have a record of 11, 8, and 2. So let's go through this, and I just want to go through this rapid fire because we don't need to go through every single one of their 21 games in detail. But the season started with them losing 4-0 against the Vegas Golden Knights. That was in LA. They led 1-0. It was a tie at 2-2. They ended up losing 4-3. They were outshot in that game 51-30. So it was a rough opening night. The next night they lost again, or next game, they lost at home against LA 4-1. That game was tied 1-1, and then it got away from them. So it was an 0-2 start. It was a tough start, right? And then they win 7-6 at Minnesota. They led 3-0, 4-2, and 5-3 in what was a very sloppy game for both teams. They won at Detroit 5-4 in overtime. They led 2-1, 3-2, and 4-3, meaning they kept losing those leads before finally winning in overtime. So their record evens up. Then they lose at Pittsburgh 6-1. They were down 3-0 after the first, so there really wasn't a whole lot of tension in that one. And then they lost 4-3 at Washington against the Caps. They were down 2-0 after 2. They showed some fight back, but they ultimately lost that game. They come back home. They win against Tampa Bay 4-2. They led 3-1 after 2 periods. They end up cruising to that 4-2 win. They lost 6-4 at home against Winnipeg. They led that one 3-1, and they outshot the Jets 44-19 in that game. So that's one of those ones where you can look at the numbers at the end and say, gee, if they'd had a couple of more saves, if all the goals were highlight reel variety, then if the defenseman had been a little better, but there's those games on their resume. Then they won 4-2 at home against Toronto. They led that one 3-1. That was during the disastrous road trip for the Maple Leafs. They went on the road. They won against St. Louis 5-1. They led that game 5-0. They did win it. They lost then at Dallas 5-2. That game was tied 1-1, and this is where it's getting really crazy watching their games, because from one game to the next, they look really good against Toronto, they look really good against St. Louis, and then against Dallas, it wasn't there. And then they lost in overtime 2-1 at Chicago. That game, they outshot the Hawks 33-19. So again, they're getting a ton of shots. They're not getting the results that they want with those tons of shots. Then they won at home against Florida 5-4, which starts a winning streak they've been on at home. Then they won 1-0 against Minnesota. That was a shutout for Quick, 21 saves there. They won 2-1 in overtime at home, again against Chicago. And then they won against Detroit 4-3, another home game. And so that's a nice, solid homestand for them, right? 4 games, 4 wins. Florida, Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit. Of the 4 teams, the most impressive win, probably over Florida, although Florida's been having their struggles. And then they went on the road. They lost at Calgary 6-5. They did lead 2-1 at one point in that game. They won at Edmonton 3-1. They outshot the Oilers 32-23 in that game. So I only took note of the ones where the shots were really lopsided one way or the other. Then they lost 4-1 at Vancouver, a game that I watched live. And yeah, LA played well, but they made Demko look fantastic in that one. Then they lost 3-2 in overtime at Seattle the next night. So the game against Seattle, they look better, but they still take the overtime loss. So what's interesting with their numbers is at home they're 6-3, away from home they're 5-5-2, and over their last 10 they're 5-3-2. Their goal differential, which can be an indicator on who is or isn't going to make the playoffs, is a -4. So they're a -4, but they have won the 4 in a row at home. They're trying to make it 5. They have the game at home tonight against the New York Rangers. What's interesting is when you look at their record currently 11-8-2, you can look at that and go, well, that's kind of mediocre. They've won 11 out of 21. But it follows a pattern. Last year they were 9-8-4, so they actually had 2 less points at this time. The season before, 9-8-4. So again, 2 points below. 2020, 2021, they did not make the playoffs that year, of course. 2019-20. 8-12-1 through 21 games. The previous season, they were 7-13-1. And then 2017-2018, a year where they made the playoffs, they were 12-7-2. Only 1 game ahead of where they are right now in their pace. And that was a team that ended up with, I think it was 100 points LA had right on the dot in 2018. So it is interesting to look at this team and realize they're a team that does tend to get off to either slow or kind of mediocre starts. And much like last season, they lost some games early on, which dragged their record down, and then they started winning. You'll notice I used a purple marker for the wins, black marker for the losses, and there's more purple as we're going along here. Although losing 3 out of 4 on the road trip didn't help. At home, they've got the 4 wins in a row. What's interesting, too, is their overall scoring picture. Well, it's an odd one in that Fiala is the leading scorer in 21 games, 6 goals, 12 assists, 18 points. So they don't have anybody at a point per game. Trevor Moore, 6 goals, 10 assists, 16 points in 21 games. Gabe Vilardi, his scoring's dropped off lately. He still has 10 goals in 21 games to go with 5 assists for 15 points. Philippe Danault, who's been getting better lately, 21 games, 6 goals, 9 assists, 15 points. Arvidsson, 19 games played, 3 goals, 11 assists, 14 points. You probably want a couple more goals from him, but what are you going to do? Kopitar, 21 games, 3 goals, 11 assists, 14 points. So right now, Anze Kopitar isn't even top 4 in scoring. I would say top 5, but Arvidsson's played just 2 less games, has the same number of points. So technically, Kopitar's still tied for 5th. But he's not in the top 4. Kaliev in 20 games, 6 goals, 7 assists, 13 points. Kempe, 21 games, 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points. Kempe is not producing this year so far the way he did last year. So the reality that they have more wins than they did at this time last year is honestly kind of encouraging. Doughty, 21 games, a goal, 9 assists for 10 points for him. As long as he's healthy, that should help. Dursey, 19 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points. And Roy, 21 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points for Matt Roy, who is an underrated player in the NHL. The goaltending numbers are not overly pretty when you get to LA here. Jonathan Quick is 6-6-1 with an .892 save percentage. The interesting thing is Cal Peterson actually has a better win-loss record at 5-2-1, but his numbers are not better at .880, being his save percentage. Quick, of course, played against Vancouver in the most recent road trip, and Peterson played against Seattle. So the debate about which goaltender is better is still there. They're being paid very handsomely. Peterson's still got term left. Quick's in the final year of his contract. It'll be interesting to see what the LA Kings do for the rest of this season. And then in the offseason, too, if the goaltending continues to be mediocre, can they get out of the first round should they make the playoffs? Are they going to be able to outscore that? And is it just a reflection that maybe the defense hasn't been good enough too, right? So when we look at the team this year compared to last year, and that's overall last year. So this is where the numbers are a little different than just that first 21 game segment I'm looking at here. In points percentage, they're sitting at .571. Last year, they ended up with a .604 points percentage. They are scoring more goals per game, 3.14. Last year, they scored 2.87 goals per game. They're allowing a lot more, 3.38 goals against per game. Last year was 2.83. So they're almost allowing a half a goal more per game to this point than what they had at the end of last season. Their power play has gotten a little better at 18.8%. Last year it was 16.1%. Their penalty kill was not great last year. It's not great this year. 74.3% this year. Last year was 76.7%. So the penalty killing has actually dropped a little bit. Their power plays come up a little bit. It kind of evens out. Their shots per game, they're getting fewer shots at 32.5. Last year it was 34.9. They're allowing more shots. They've allowed 29.4. Last year it was 28.5. In the first period, they're allowing 21 goals. They've scored 18. Last year they had a problem in the first period too. They got outscored 64-55. In the second period, they liked the second period. 28-25 in their favor this year. 92-88 in their favor last year. But where the big difference comes in is the third period. This year, it's 18 goals they've scored. They've allowed 23. Last year, they scored 83 and allowed 73. So for the Kings, clearly they had a really good run after that first 21-game segment, right? And they got off to that slow start. Been very similar this year. Inconsistency's part of the game. Their next 12 games, there's some very winnable games on their upcoming schedule. First off tonight, they're at home against the Rangers. That one we'll see, right? The Rangers are kind of inconsistent as well. Then they go on the road for one game. They play in San Jose. Then they come home. They play against Ottawa, Seattle, Arizona, and Carolina. So they could go to San Jose and rattle off a win. They could come home playing Ottawa, Seattle, Arizona. That's 3 games they should win, right? Arizona at that point is going to be at least 10 games deep in their road trip. Then Carolina is not an easy win, but it's one they could win. Carolina hasn't looked quite Carolina-like lately. Then they go on the road, and this is a big 6-game road trip. But again, are these opponents ridiculously tough to beat? Not really. So they do the Canadian part of it first. Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal. Ottawa, really struggling. Doesn't seem to matter where they're playing. Toronto has been very up and down as well. Montreal, we expect them to fall off, although we've been expecting that since really before the season started. It hasn't happened yet. But then they go to Columbus. Columbus, that's a winnable game. They go to Buffalo, much the same. Buffalo's, kind of mired in their own muck as it is right now before they go to Boston. So even if Boston, let's just say Boston, they don't beat Boston. They don't beat the Rangers. Let's say they don't beat Carolina either. It's a schedule where it looks very favorable to the LA Kings. This is a team that should go on a run. I would say of their next 12 games, they should win at least 8 of them. And what's interesting to me is that if they do that, that should solidify their spot as number 2 in the division. And this is a team that could be dangerous come a playoff series. Last year, they did take the Oilers to 7. They did ultimately bow out in 7 games. But this is still a team that has Kopitar, that has Doughty, which they did not have in that series against Edmonton. And they still have Jonathan Quick, who showed last year in the playoffs he can still be Jonathan Quick. He can still be very hard to beat on any given night. And even though he has an .892 save percentage, even though I didn't think he looked great in that game I watched against Vancouver, I never take for granted that when Jonathan Quick gets on a heater, he can be one of the best goaltenders in the league even still. So for the LA Kings, this might also kind of be a last hurrah type season in that Quick's contract's coming to an end. And players don't get younger. That's kind of not how calendars work or how time works. And so this could be a time for them to go on a bit of a run. Again, the next 12 games look favorable to them. There has been inconsistency in their play. Like I said, there have been games where they've outshot their opponents by a lot, and they still lost those games. But the schedule upcoming tells you they should do quite well. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. What do you think of the Kings? Are they just a middling team that's going to end up being first-round fodder? Or are they potentially going to emerge as a contender as the season rolls along? I wouldn't rule out this team emerging as a contender. One thing they have going for them, they do have depth. Their scoring depth, they have that in spades. And so it means that when Fiala cools off, as long as Velarde heats up, they've still got Kopitar. There's other names that aren't on the board. They've got some good scoring there. Thus, the fact that their goal scoring's gone up this year, they need to bring their goals against down. That's the obvious one, right? And so if they can bring their goals against down, and again, this upcoming schedule should allow them to do so, all of a sudden a month from now we might be saying, hey, so these Kings are pretty darn good. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.